again, I think we have to lay the groundwork for what exactly wealth disparity is. This has been a hot topic in politics recently. I think it's going to be a hot topic in the coming election year, 2016. And we have to try to get to a point to understand if it actually is the problem they're telling us that it is. So, as it is defined, we are supposed to be getting very upset about the fact, we'll give you some quotes here, that a new study shows that the gap in the wealth that different American households have accumulated is more extreme than any other time since the Great Depression. Additionally, economists Emmanuel Saez and Gabriel Zuckman, they're the two economists that have been credited with establishing the mechanism by which to measure wealth disparity. Of course, this is different from income disparity. We're talking about wealth. And they have revealed that the share of total household wealth owned by the top 0.1% increased to 22% in 2012, from 7% in the late 1970s. The top 0.1% includes 160,000 families with total net assets of more than $20 million in 2012. According to inequality.org, the wealth share of America's top 3% rose from 44.8% of the nation's wealth in '89 to 51.8% in 2007 and 54.4% in 2013. The top 3% now hold over double the wealth of America's poorest 90% of families. And then some nice charts to demonstrate for us why we should all be very, very upset about this disparity in wealth. We have a distribution of U.S. family wealth in 2013, with the bottom 90% of families owning only 25% of the wealth, and the richest 3% only owning 54% of the wealth. Another one shows us ownership of U.S. financial assets. This includes such things as, owning a house, cars, investments. And as you can see, the gap here is even much larger. But the question that I want to raise today is to ask, is the disparity in wealth the proper measure? Is that something that really warrants our concern or consideration? And what I like to do, because I'm a farmer, is to go back to the idea and the days of prairie living. If we think about the days, and I immediately go to my grandfather and his father. They arrived in North Dakota from Russia in 1899. And they found their way out into the middle of North Dakota, and I visited the homestead. They literally are in the middle of nowhere. I don't know why you'd leave Siberia and just go to another Siberia, but that's exactly what they did. But they were out there in the middle of nowhere, and they were all by themselves. Remote farmers in different locations. I remember my grandpa telling me about when one of his siblings got married. It was a day's journey to get to the brother's farm, and a couple of the sisters had to stay home to milk the cows because you couldn't, that had to be tended to, right? So in any case, if we think about this society of early settlers out on the prairie, what was their work? Primarily, we had an agrarian society. We had a whole bunch of farmers. They were responsible for and to themselves only. The early settlers were equal in the sense that they were all struggling in the same way: survive or die. There were no other options. If your crop if you didn't get a good farm crop, you were going to starve that winter. If you chose to be lazy and you just didn't feel like going out in the field that day, you were going to starve. There were no other options. And what I'd like you to think of is that this kind of early prairie living is sort of the baseline of human existence. This is how we survived. You needed to produce your food in order to survive. That was the primary goal. Food, sustenance. So we have this baseline here at the bottom. And this is where all our little farmers are. First one showed up in the middle of North Dakota. Then a few months later, some relative in Siberia got word, and he showed up. Then another. And let's imagine we had a collective society of 10 farmers out in the middle of North Dakota. But then one day we have this first farmer who arrived, the red X, and he thinks to himself, there's got to be a better way. I'm sitting here with a scythe, and I'm walking through the fields, chopping things down. There's got to be a better way than this. I should be able to speed up this process. I should be able to find a way to harvest this crop faster before the winter sets in and destroys a quarter of my field. So farmer one decides, I'm going to take a chance. And he either finds a way to leave his field and maybe negotiate and barter for food from other farmers in the area, or more likely what he did was he tended to his field during the day and burned the midnight oil in the barn at night, trying to come up with a way to make the process faster, easier, more efficient. Farmer two next door always knew of this guy as being a pretty smart guy, and he says, you know what, I'll help you as long as I can cash in on this with you. If we can produce this together, I want the benefits. And we might have even farmer three who says, let me in on this too. I believe in you. So these three guys sacrifice evenings with their families to sit out in the barn and try to improve their process. And what did we end up with? Lo and behold, our farmer number one began with the scythe, toiling away, breaking his back to get his harvest in. And he created this. Completely obsolete at this point. But with a team of horses and some ingenuity, this did speed up the process. It speeded up the process, it became more efficient, and he was successful. I use this other example, just this other picture, just to give you a visual of how far we've come since that time. And that one is actually a state-of-the-art combine. We have nothing like that. So if we go back, then the question is, what's his compensation? He took a lot of time, a lot of effort, all on his own. Does he get compensated for what he did? Well, for this early farmer, his compensation is that his quality of living improved. Where all these other farmers are sitting down there still at the baseline, scythe in hand, this guy now has more abundant crops to cash in on. He's got more time with his family, and he's probably not in the need of a masseuse quite as often as he was before. And so what has happened? Now we have all these other farmers green with envy. They want it. I want that too. So what does farmer number one say? I'll produce more. I'll produce some for you, but you're going to pay me for it. I'm not doing it for free. These other farmers have a choice. You want to try to save up and figure out a way to pay farmer 1, 2, and 3 to purchase this combine, or keep doing it the old way? I think most people prefer efficiency and less time and back-breaking work. So they're going to find a way to purchase this invention from him. And what happens? Everyone's quality of life has now improved. In this small society of 10 farmers, we no longer have anyone living at that baseline. Now, of course, farmer 1, 2, and 3, their baseline is a little bit higher than the other farmers, but don't they deserve it? They took the time, they took the effort, they took the risk to develop something. The other people wanted it, and they should be paid to produce it for them. That their quality of life is a little bit easier now should not be something to be jealous of or demand a piece of. So, I want to show you another illustration. When I teach this section of Ayn Rand in my classes at Ridgewater College, I use what I call the triangle of wealth. And I indicate to students that what I want you to pay attention to is where the base of the triangle is. The base of the triangle here is where sort of the new baseline is. The farmer that broke out and produced something raised the standard of living for everyone. So those who did nothing really to produce this contraption have an improved quality of life. The baseline has increased. But the farmer with the idea is at the top of the triangle. And I would argue he deserves to be there. And our two little orange farmers who followed the red farmer, they deserve to be somewhere in the middle between the baseline and the top. Correct? I think we would all agree on that. The current debate in politics and in our society in general is focused on this disparity in wealth. The very thing that they are arguing about, or what they're arguing, is that the difference between the X and the baseline is unfair. That the shape of the triangle somehow needs to be monitored. Which is the proper shape? Which triangle is the best? Clearly, the one on your far right indicates that there's an enormous disparity between the rich, the richest, and the poorest. But should we really care? Does that triangle matter? Does that shape matter? Or the one in the middle, which I always say, John Rawls, I think, would totally approve of the one in the middle. He agrees there should be a triangle, but we shouldn't let that triangle get so distorted that the peak is too far atop the base. So the current measure, and when our politicians and our media talks about wealth disparity, they're always focused on that red line, the distance between the peak and the base. I would say that right now, the argument would be that we're somewhere, that our society is residing in that third triangle on your right. Super, super wealthy people in this country, and a very wide gap between them and the poorest. But once again, why have we ignored that baseline? Is that not the more important measure? The distance we have come. As a farmer, I still listen. I was telling Nathaniel earlier, I always feel like I can never complain when I'm around my father-in-law. He's 83 years old. He's been farming his whole life. And he tells me the stories about the days when they were still walking behind an ox, or I don't know what they use, but pulling a plow through the field. In Minnesota, I should have gotten a picture of this, but in Minnesota, we have so much wetland that they have come up with a way, they call it tiling the fields. And they have this huge machinery now that they bring out, and they dig deep into the earth, and they lay this huge tubing, which is meant to drain the excess water off of the fields. We actually just had some tiling done this spring. There were all kinds of huge machines out there for days. And I remember my father-in-law came over and he's like, first time we tiled a field, we had to dig that all by hand. Yeah. They had a team of like 20 men digging by hand. And all the women would come over and they'd be cooking the meals to keep the men going all day, he said. So anyway, I think my argument is going to focus on the fact that we are forgetting the measure that matters. And it's the distance between where we were as an agrarian, settling prairie society to where we are today. Now, the question is going to become, why in the world are we so sidetracked? Why are so many people in our society focused on the size of the triangle, and not once do we talk about the distance we have come from the baseline? I would say that in a truly free economy, the size and shape of the triangle should not matter. Those who produce do deserve the financial gain, and how they save, spend, or invest it is completely up to them. They determine through their own free will and choices where they fall on that triangle. Only in a truly free society. I mean, you can have a person who comes up with an invention and he makes $1 million, which seems like nothing in today's world, I guess. It is nothing anymore. But he can blow it all in. I mean, you can blow that money in no time. Or you can be a really smart investor. And let's face it, some people are just really good at making money. And should they be penalized for that? I would say no. So, why are we sidetracked? Why are the politicians focused so much on this, the difference in the sizes of the triangles? Power. Politicians have discovered that there's a lot of power in getting a society focused on the disparity in wealth, and getting us to believe that disparity in wealth is an actual problem. What they use to promote the focus on the size of the triangle, rather than the distance we've come from the base, is jealousy and greed, to use Ayn Rand's term. Jealousy is an easy emotion to stimulate, and it's an easy emotion to manipulate. You get people jealous enough, and then they're going to want you to do something about it. It can be used to convince people they deserve things they did not earn. How dare, and for some reason Jeffrey Epstein is the first name to pop to mind. Do you all know who he is? Look him up if you don't. Who cares if Jeffrey Epstein has 10 jets and 20 boats? The importance of focusing on the size of the triangle is to make everyone else jealous. I do have a boat, so I'm not stating person, and it's a cheap boat that I've put more money into fixing than I spent to purchase the damn thing. But even if I have just a fishing boat, who am I to stand back and be like, but look at that yacht he has. If only we could take a little bit of his money and distribute it, we could all have, I don't want a yacht, but just a more reliable boat. Thank God I have 4 kids and 4 oars in that boat. We have paddled to shore more often than I'd like to say. Anyway, focusing on jealousy, focus in creating jealousy in people, wanting things they don't have, wanting things they didn't earn, helps those in power advocate for the redistribution of wealth. You vote for me because it really is not fair that that guy has all those boats. We'll let him have one, but let's take the rest of them away and let's all share that wealth so we're all a little bit better off. Isn't that really the message that they're promoting, our politicians? The appeal to jealousy encourages us to focus on the size of the triangle, and it prevents us or blinds us from recognizing that measure between where we were without all of those industrialists creating things for us to use and buy, and where we are today. So what is really going on? At the very same time that we have politicians promoting jealousy amongst the middle class and poor, and they promise they will work to redistribute the wealth of the super rich. The policies of our politicians, when they get into office, in reality do exactly the opposite. They increase the wealth of the super wealthy, and they increase their own wealth, typically, in the process. So what are the facts? I stumbled upon this fact a couple months ago, and I don't know if many of you knew this, perhaps this group does, but since 2009, since our president of hope and change got into office, and since our economic crisis, I don't even know if it had reached its peak in 2000. I don't know if we've even reached the peak yet. But since 2009, the number of billionaires in the world has doubled. Doubled. We have a combined wealth of today's billionaires has grown by 124% in the last 4 years to $5.4 trillion. And that's according to the Even It Out campaign. And even that name alone tells us what this group is after, yes? The 85 richest people saw their fortunes increase by around $240 billion over the past year alone. That equates to $668 million per day, or $500,000 per minute. Want to let that seep in a little bit?
Now I'm jealous.
Oh. Likewise, we have a group of politicians in D.C. who have also seen enormous financial gains in the wake of the financial crisis. In 2011, the Huffington Post reported that despite the economic recession, the net wealth of members of Congress continues to rise. Members of the House and Senate have a collective net worth of $2.04 billion. And the vast majority of the increase goes to the wealthiest members of Congress, who also account for most of Congress's net worth. According to CBS News in 2012, Congress is a club that consists of 245 millionaires. Based on 2009 data, there are currently 66 in the Senate and 179 in the House. What's important here is pointing out that while just 1% of Americans are millionaires, 66% of senators are millionaires, and 41% of our congresspeople are millionaires. What's that? Oh, you're surprised it's not higher?
But they will be when they get out and go to work for the lobbyists anyway.
Yes, exactly. Once they're out of office and they can spend more time on the speaking circuit and all that stuff, yes, they'll be worth much more. These are, right, sitting senators and congresspeople. So, this really then begs the question, if you got 245 millionaires in Congress and in the Senate, how is it that they are running campaigns claiming that they are going to go after the wealthiest 1% to redistribute that wealth? Or is it just lip service to promote the jealousy and those who fall well below that top 1%? Because what they're really after is just the power and the status. And we'll see there's probably something else they may be after. The real problem is not that there is a disparity between the rich and the poor. It's not that the triangle looks like this, and it's not that the triangle looks like that. The real problem, and the one that your politicians are not going to point out to you, is the way the rich are given special advantages and opportunities for expanding their wealth through government policies and regulations. I think probably there are about 1,000 different examples I could use to demonstrate this. And some of you probably have some really good examples yourselves. The one that came to mind immediately was eminent domain, and how often that is abused to confiscate land and property from private people in order to turn it over to large corporations and businesses to build condos, shopping malls, amusement parks. Does private property and ownership mean nothing? I don't bemoan a wealthy man for being wealthy, but when he can get a prime piece of real estate by convincing a politician to declare it eminent domain, that is an unfair playing field. He is not earning that wealth honestly. He's manipulating the system, and what he's doing in the end is pushing out everyone else that's on that triangle beneath the peak. So the one example that I decided to settle on and share with you today is getting a lot of attention in Minnesota right now. And it's the marijuana law. It was just last year, I believe in May, that Minnesota passed the law to allow for medicinal marijuana, and only medicinal marijuana. And my husband and I, we have long been advocates for legalizing hemp production. David Kelly and I have had long conversations about this. A lot of people don't really realize that there is a difference between marijuana and hemp. Marijuana can get you high, hemp cannot. They do come from the same family. And hemp has an amazing, not only is it such a versatile product or crop, but it is one of the few crops in the world that when you plant it, it actually feeds the soil rather than draining it of nutrients. But does anyone know why hemp and marijuana are so inextricably linked in our society? No? The person who wanted hemp out was William Randolph Hearst. He owned, I don't know how many magazines and newspapers he owned, but he was the media giant. And he was also the logging giant. And hemp was competition for his logging industry, which he used to feed his media industry. So if you can link hemp to marijuana and make people believe they're the same thing, you can get the politicians to make hemp illegal, which is precisely what happened, and gave him a monopoly on the logging industry. And to this day, it is allowed in this country to buy and sell hemp products. So you'll see hemp oil, you'll see hemp candles, lotion, but you cannot grow hemp, or you cannot grow hemp, and you also cannot import hemp to produce products, which means any hemp products you see on the market are imported products. They come from elsewhere. And the craziest thing is that during, I believe it was World War II, maybe it was World War I, the 3M plant in the town where we live, it was a rope manufacturing plant using hemp to create rope. And hemp was an indigenous plant in Minnesota. And so when our politicians illegalized hemp, they had to eradicate an indigenous plant from Minnesota. And I never knew this until I moved to Minnesota, but apparently ditchweed, that's hemp growing wild, and you have to eradicate it whenever you find it. It's fascinating. So anyway, now Minnesota is back in the news. They want to produce medicinal marijuana. And I heard about this, and I said to my husband, wouldn't it be great if we can do some research and find out how we get the permit that probably is going to be necessary? What's that? Okay, thank you. that's going to be necessary to farm and produce marijuana. Because I told my husband, I'm like, this is going to be a cash cow. And it would be awesome if we can get on the ground floor, right? We're going to be marijuana growers. Pretty sure there'll be all kinds of rules. We'll have to put up a fence and probably some razor wire, around the fields. But it might be worth a little bit of investment. So I did a little research. Who was going to get the permits, and how do you go about getting a permit? All you needed was a $20,000 non-refundable application fee. I looked at my husband and I said, so really what they're telling us is, little farmers, not a chance in hell you're going to cash in on this. This is a business that is being propped up for corporate Americans, for the rich who can afford to possibly part with $20,000 for no benefit. So my first comment to my husband was, once whoever gets the permit, I want to know exactly who they are, and I want to know which political party they donated to. But it gets better than that. The other thing that's worth noting is that the permits were being given not to marijuana growers. They're calling them manufacturers. Because everything, and this again is exactly why the small guy is being squeezed out of this opportunity. Because you have to be able to cultivate, harvest, manufacture, package, and process the marijuana in the same location. And one of the rules is that even as medicinal marijuana, it's not going to be sold in a smokable form. It'll be sold only in oil, vapor, or pill form. I think those are the three. So, who got the permits? There were 12 applicants, which I'm actually surprised by. I thought there would probably be 4 for good show, but 12. And the 2 that got it were Leafline Labs, which is a subsidiary of Bachman Florists. And the Bachman family owns a whole, not Michelle Bachman, this is a separate Bachman family. But they own a whole bunch of greenhouses and flour, and they're a very big, successful corporation. So Leafline Labs and Minnesota Medical Solutions, also a corporation that's been in Minnesota for a long time. So the awards were given to these 2 companies. And as I had told my husband, I want to know who they gave to for their political donations. And while that information has been very difficult to pin down, I haven't succeeded in it yet. Last week, everybody in Minnesota became familiar with this man. His name is Manny Munson-Regala. He's the Assistant Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Health and Overseer of the State Office of Medical Cannabis. He is one of the people, in charge of creating the law that would regulate medicinal marijuana. He's one of the men that was in charge of stipulating that 2 producers only would be given licenses to produce. So what came out in the news last week? He is switching roles in the business from regulator to regulated, as he has moved to Cottage Grove-based Leafline Labs to serve as their CEO. The media has gone wild about this, and while they're all trying to argue everything's on the up and up, there's been no ethical violations. Senator Warren Limmer of Minnesota said he is now an executive, and I would assume a highly paid one at that, working for a corporation that's going to be one of the few providers in the state. Few providers, one of 2 providers in the state. It seems all too convenient. And it just really does, doesn't it? In the end, I want to go back to this idea of the triangle. I don't think anyone should really care about the size of the triangle. As long as you've got people earning their wealth honestly and without political favors. I think that if we were, as Ayn Rand suggested, to separate politics and finances, politics and economics, we would find a little more natural shaped triangle. The triangle is so exaggerated today, primarily because our economics and our politics are inextricably linked. How are those like uber wealthy people getting wealthier despite an economic recession? Nice little rules like this. And again, I want to go back to, as our politicians and everyone else tries to advocate and focus on the size of the triangle and make us all jealous of that wealthiest 1%, again, if that wealthiest 1% has earned that wealth honestly, the really greedy ones are the ones that are sitting at the bottom, demanding a piece of what they did not earn. And in fact, not being appreciative of the fact that they've done relatively little or nothing to reap the benefits of many of the products that our industrialists have given us. If we go back and we look at that early baseline, this is the way our grandparents and great-grandparents largely lived, is it not? This was a hard life. It was a difficult existence. But you had people who went into the barn at night and tried to make an invention. You had other people who were working around the hour, like, I can do something more here. I can make an improvement. And look at the way we live today. It hasn't been that long. My grandfather is still alive. My father-in-law is 83. He's still talking about the days they were digging the ditches by hand. And look at the way we live today. Every single person in this country has benefited in some way, shape, or form from the work of the industrialists. And we should not be so consumed with the shape of the triangle. We need to be more consumed with the distance we've come from here to here. And I didn't even put a line because I don't know where I would put a line. Like, where are we today compared to where we were? I wouldn't be at this conference if it weren't for the work of some industrialist. Could have gotten on a horse, but I didn't need a lot more time off of work. And so, to close it up, this is precisely my point and what I want to draw attention to. And I think this is a great gift that Ayn Rand has given us, and we don't give it enough focus and attention. Wealth disparity is not a problem. It's just not, until favors are being garnered, and that's squeezing people from the lower classes out of potential financial improvement. But if you get rid of politics in the economy, then it's up to every individual to determine what their triangle is going to look like or where they're going to fall on the triangle. All right. So if you have any questions, I will be free to discuss or to answer. Okay.
Thank you for your talk. Kathy, could you say anything about that French Piketty who got all of the awards, making a case that the disparity is because the wealthy are not taxed enough, and that we will always have an increase in this disparity because they make more with investments than a lower income person can ever possibly make with a savings account. So it's going to go up and up and up. That's about all I could understand about his theories.
Well, and I find that interesting. There is always this assumption that people who start out with little or who are in the middle class, that they have zero opportunity for economic growth. And Nathaniel and I had a conversation about this earlier today. That no, there is, and especially if you get rid of politics. When you got politicians in there giving special favors and creating special situations where the wealthy they have an easier time maintaining their wealth or growing the wealth. Middle class people have opportunities to increase their wealth. One of the reasons that's been suggested that why the wealth disparity is so great today since the beginning of the economic recession is because middle-class Americans have had to go heavily into debt during this time just to stay afloat. But I would argue it's a matter of values. I don't think people are going into debt just to stay afloat. Some, probably, possibly. But a lot of people are going into debt because there's a lot of stuff they want. And they are not, like I said, I go back to the mentality of my grandfather and my great-grandfather. When they had extra, they held on to it because they didn't know what next year would bring. And today, people get a little extra, and it's out the door as soon as you get it. I want the next best cell phone. I want the next best car. If producing wealth is really important to someone who's in the middle class or even in the lower economic branches, the opportunities are there, but that they have to value it. And the tragedy is that we live in a society today that doesn't make people really aware of the fact that one option is to have nothing. We live in a society that perpetuates this idea that you are entitled to a certain amount. You're entitled. Let me see if I can get this to work. Oh, no. Here we go. Somehow that you're entitled, if this is the baseline today, somehow we're entitled to have that new cell phone on the market. And no, what you're entitled to is your life and your existence. But it's your job to promote that existence. And the quality of your life is also entirely up to you. And your quality improves, the better the choices are that you make for yourself. Does that go anywhere to help answer your question?
Because of the math, he thinks it's going to continue just because of that disparity of what you can earn that way.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not real familiar with his arguments, so I would say, number one, he's wrong, and number two, I'm wondering if he's operating off of this idea that wealth is finite. And a lot of really smart people, it's stunning, believe that wealth is finite. And if wealth is finite, then yes, people are being boxed out. But it's not finite.
I would also point out that in the beginning, when you had your 10 farmers, there was no income disparity.
They were all the same. Right, I would agree. Which is why I think, these conversations on the much older generations, it's just lost on them, this idea of income or wealth disparity, at least, for sure. Hi, Nathaniel.
Hi, Kathy. I wanted to thank you for your talk because it draws light on this issue that I think actually does directly relate. I forget her name, but this issue, from what I understand of the way she sort of explained it, is, well, this is a problem because not everybody can get as much. Who cares? That's what your argument really is. It's like, that's not the argument. We need to call BS, essentially, on the whole debate. Oh, these people can't invest as much as those people. It's a runaway train. Yeah, but this train didn't knock that train off the tracks, so who cares? So I just wanted to thank you kind of for bringing that out and giving us sort of the ammunition, in a sense, to talk about this debate in a different context and to redirect it away from the sort of straw man that they've got, which is essentially just disparity. It's just a straw man, disparity. Well, yeah, but if everybody's doing well, who cares? and that's the goal. So thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I agree. If everyone is doing well, then who cares? And we have to reevaluate what it means to be doing well. If you've got a roof over your head, I think you're doing well. It doesn't matter. I mean, in fact, I was complaining to my husband that we need to do some updates on the house. And like 5 minutes after I said that, I walked up to the door and I opened the door to the house. The whole door frame fell off the house. And he's like, you planned that. I'm like, I didn't plan it. I'm just pointing out a fact.
You've got a house. Yes, it was an excellent presentation you gave. Like my grandparents, like yours, came over probably 3 generations earlier. They were so poor when they started off that the neighbors gave them stuff to feed the horse and they ate it. I've heard stories about that. Anyways, so I don't disagree with anything here. The one thing is I've been in startups my entire life in tech, and I've also been in farming. And over the past couple of years, I've had some reasonable success in startups. But what I did do is I got to talk to this 0.1%.
You got to do what?
To deal with this 0.1%.
Okay.
They're not nice people. And some advice a mentor gave me, he said that if you have money and you are wealthy, you will not have it for very long if you are nice. And, well, that I put aside. But what I will say is that they would be so far removed from this presentation that you just gave. I don't think they would listen to it or understand it. Because their idea of a successful day in the field contributing is sitting there for the shareholders and for themselves on how to make money and not lose it in that day. They don't care about my grandparents. They don't care about yours. All right? They're trying to figure out a way to increase wealth. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but one of the major reasons for this is, at least that I have stumbled across, like in startups and everything else, in terms of the money, you need, from your beginning in the farm on the left to the airplane on the right, it takes capital. The ideas don't matter so much, and neither does the sweat. It takes tremendous amount of capital. It's a pyramid of technology. It goes up and up. So at that point, those who control the money feel that they have taken all the risk and deserve most of the reward. You're a tool in it. I've been, there's all these clauses and ways that they can take everything from me. If you go through a regular financing situation, there's all these traps, and you have to be careful for them. The one other thing is that I would say that I've met some very honest CEOs and some very honest people in this 0.1%, but they cannot do the right thing. And the reason they cannot do the right thing is because we're in a global economy and there are shareholders. And if I say to you, say for instance you're $20,000, if you invest $20,000 in me, and I say, well, I lost your money, but I did the right thing. I did the right thing, but I lost your money. What are you going to do? Are you going to keep me in charge? Are you going to give me it next time? You will not do, you'll do neither, right? And so even some of them in there who know this cannot do the right thing. They have to answer to the shareholders, and they have to do what is best for that. Remember, the shareholder doesn't care. It just fans out. It fans out at the top. So this is one thing. I mean, I honestly just discovered Ayn Rand. I'm pretty well educated. I've been in college, and I read all I can. I just discovered it last June. And a friend of mine told me this. I haven't seen anything that in this philosophy that addresses this problem. This is the fundamental. I mean, she says how it should work, but there is a huge. You understand what I'm saying? There's a huge problem about answering to other people, answering shareholders, and doing the right thing. And I'd like to know, like, your opinion or anyone else's opinion on it, because that in itself would flatten out. That would fix a lot of the problems you have here. But I don't see a way out of this in terms of dealing with these people and what they have to do to do it. And like I said, if you do the right thing, you're out. Anyways.
Does anyone have a response? I mean, that's a lot to take in, and I have to think about that. I mean, the whole idea of the Wall Street financier and what he's doing to create wealth. I mean, it's not even, and many of them are not even actually producing anything. It's just moving money.
That's right. If he doesn't, he'll be out on the street.
Right, right.
I have an answer
Okay.
to this. And I've dealt with some of these 0.1 percenters myself, many of whom are very, very nice. The reality is that the securities legislation that we started passing way back, even before the Great Depression, started in Kansas, where I'm from, so that's a real mark against it, was designed to limit the access to capital to entrepreneurs, particularly those who, in fact, the person who pushed it said patent companies. So particularly those creating new inventions, which are actually where the value is created, not in capital. That's been proven. That's in my last talk. But I talk about the three prongs that undercut the ability of technology startups in my book, The Decline and Fall of the American Entrepreneur. One of them is we've weakened our patent system since 2000. Another one is Sarbanes-Oxley, which makes it almost impossible to raise cash. And venture capital, most of the venture capital industry in this country has gone under unless it's been crony capitalist. And number three is, which relates to Walter Rogers' talk, is we changed the rules on giving out stock options, so it made it harder to get new quality people in. So I am sorry very much for your experience. If you had done this 15 years ago, you'd probably be telling us another story.
But once again, government regulation and intervention is what's changed this field,
Oh, absolutely.
if I'm hearing you
all
correctly.
three. The subtitle of my book is Little Known Laws and Regulations, because in the 1990s we had economic growth. In the 2000s we didn't, even before the financial crisis, if you look at the data. And it looks like the policies are pretty similar. In fact, Bush cut the taxes, although he raised spending. But it doesn't look like there should have been such a disparity. But Sarbanes-Oxley really put a kibosh on startups. The patent rules made it very hard forever to get a patent. If you're an investor in a new technology company, you want a strong patent, ideally. And there were actually several other accounting rules that were changed that I mentioned briefly in my book. But these changes, it's new technology that makes us wealthier. That's where the high quality jobs come from. Nothing against people who run like a McDonald's or something, but that actually doesn't create real per capita increases in wealth. And that's why these small changes made such an effect.
Thank you.
Great talk, Kathy. My favorite part is your examples. In this example of the medical marijuana and the guy who, first of all, the high barriers to entry, and then the guy who was in politics and then entered the productive field. Has anyone, are you drawing the initial implication that it will worsen inequality, or has anyone, you're saying the media, how has the media's response to it, and has there been any recognition that this affects income inequality?
That wealth inequality affects income inequality?
No, that this law in this particular case and these barriers to entry worsen income inequality because you're only allowing people who have wealth above a certain point to make money off of this new area.
Well, and it also goes back, one of the things that really irritated me about this law is that whole manufacturer part. The manufacturer.
Right.
My initial gut reaction was, what business is it of theirs? Who are they to tell me that if I want to grow the marijuana, I also have to, I was saying, when I grow soybeans, I don't press them, press the oil out and get, to make soy candles. I harvest the soybeans, get them on a train, and ship them off. I don't even go that far. I dump them all off at the elevator.
Right.
Why is marijuana any different than that?
Right.
To put these kinds of regulations in place is just another way to produce a monopoly that is going to help a handful of really rich guys get richer.
So I agree with that, but are you the first one to point this out? Has someone...
Oh, in Minnesota, I have not seen anyone writing about that yet. I have not even seen anyone complain about the 20,000. There's been a little bit of tongue-in-cheek from, writers, but nobody raised a word of complaint.
That's what got me thinking as I was hearing you, sometimes it's easy to talk about the big laws that are happening in the U.S., sort of big, but how many times and how many little ways are little things are happening that do clearly worsen inequality in a bad way that maybe aren't looped into the overall debate?
Right, and I don't think people see it.
Right.
I mean, they don't see it. It's like, oh, well, and it's so foreign, I think, to it. Because, I mean, let's face it. You've got corporate farmers today. You've got very few family farms. And amongst the family farmers, most of them are like aging farmers. My 83-year-old father-in-law he would never contemplate growing marijuana. He wouldn't contemplate growing any product other than soybeans and corn because that's what he's comfortable with. So I don't think there are enough people who understand that this has been a tool and a mechanism to, like, in my opinion, feed or to return political favors.
I'm back. I just wanted to add a comment, really to build off of what Dale said and kind of respond to the concern. I think your talk addresses this in the crony capitalism, essentially is what you're talking about. I think of a quote by a guy whose name escapes me, but get out of our way. I mean, that's essentially the answer as far as my limited knowledge goes. If you're doing the right thing and you're losing money, that to me says there's something wrong with the system in which you're operating. Because if you systematically lose money by doing the right thing, that's not how it should work. And so we get out of it by addressing exactly what you brought up, which is, oh, wow, you got a law passed, you put a bunch of stuff into place, and now you're working in a position which is directly benefited by the law. That's weird. So, no, I think you nailed it. Thanks.
And that's one of the few things, Ray, that's involved in all of this that has sparked any controversy, is that this man who wrote the law is now going to work for the industry the law is regulating. That's the only ruffling of feathers that's come out of all of this.
The young lady who asked about the Frenchman's book, I believe it was Capitalism in the 21st Century by, hold on, I'll get it here. Piketty. Yeah. There's a rebuttal to it in the Objective Standard in February of 2015. It's about an 8,500 word rebuttal to it, and they do a pretty good job. I think we could do better, but it tears apart his math pretty well.
I think that your point is correct. Income inequality is of no consequence. What is of consequence is income mobility. And I think that's what crony capitalism affects. The problem is the politicians, if they address that, they would have to find themselves the cause of it. And typically in politics, they cause the problem, then they point out the problem, but blame someone else and want new legislation to cause more problems.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.